Today's presentation is done by Dr. Francesc Bellaubi. He's a geologist and mining tech engineer with a PhD in natural science from the University of Osnabrück in Germany and studying theology. He will introduce himself a bit later. And the title of his presentation is The Role of Geoethics in Georesources Management and Governance.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for this short presentation. I will be today talking about geoethics. Maybe this concept is for you new, and I will try to unfold it little by little by using case studies approach. I will go from practice to theory and then going back to practice. And after each presentation, I think that is important for me because to get feedback from people, from you. I mean, this is quite a strange situation because I'm used to give speeches in libraries and for small kids, for grandparents, for everybody who allows me to listen, who's willing to listen, maybe new ideas, new approaches, not all of them may be following completely academic or scientific method, but I think that is interesting because I'm going to talk about gnostic knowledge, which is not exactly scientific knowledge, but more holistic approach to reality and how we understand this reality. I will be talking about interpretation of reality based on experience lived by people. So, and in this case, I'm using an approach by Turenne, quite well-known sociologist of sociological intervention. I mean, when the researcher is involved fully in the research. So it's that quite interesting, and I hope to share, your opinions. As I said, I'm starting with the first presentation, and then I will stop to get a bit of feedback from your side. Then I will dig a bit deeper in how to structure these findings coming from the real world, to say it like that. I will go for a theory that can explain my findings, and then I'm testing. I'm using a kind of extractive reasoning. It's a bit what Sherlock Holmes used to do. So goes to the practice. Empirical, deduction, okay, what I found, but before to construct a theory, let the data, to fill up your mind, and then is digging, okay, what is the best explanation, and then is going back to practice to check this theory. It's basically what detectives they are doing. That is the process of my thinking. So I'm going for the first one. I will start talking about a project that I was involved when I was working with the GIZ in Bolivia, and that was in Cochabamba. Cochabamba is quite famous because the water war in 2000. So we had, as probably most of you are aware, we had people fighting for water rights in the sense, actually was not a privatization. The people were quite upset about they were afraid about losing water access and water rights, what is called customary law to the water sources. It was not so much the privatization of the water services as it is. It was an increase of tariffs indeed, but that was not the main reason why they went to streets and they strike, and even 3 people die. And well, I think that that is quite interesting because what we try as a working for the GIZ, as an expert, what we try is to move in 2015 in a new concept on what water means for people, what are the values, what is the water ethics for a new water culture. And we develop the water agenda of Cochabamba, in a situation that was potentially of potential conflicts again, as it was in 2000. So 2000 is the starting point. 2015 is where, through a project, we start to rethink how we want to manage water and what is the fundamental principles about governance. Okay, making a clear distinction about management and governance. So this is a quite illustrating slide, What we found in 2015 is a conflicting situation. This is from Google Earth. You see the valley of Cochabamba. You have the river here. I think that you can see my arrow here. And all this is with the university, we start to make an inventory of water conflicts, different kind of water conflicts. This is the city, and this is an agriculture area. Here you had a big project feeding water from a 4,000 meters dam into the valley. This is what it's called an Interandean Valley. Okay, so as you see, is a situation that reflects this conflict for water use between users and between water users and between users of water. Okay, now, but what is really the problem? That's a situation, but the problem is a bit more, let's say, it's another, not complicated, but it's another problem. What is behind this situation? What is under this situation? We have a catchment of a river. It's a river relatively small with an average of rainfall of this typical from these areas. 70% of the water, the most striking thing is 70% of the water is lost. Okay, so we have a context of a scarcity, but as we know, scarcity is an anthropocentric concept. So reflect somehow human values. Is the difference in between what the water is available versus the demand of water. And in this concept of scarcity, we have here in this map, this is the catchments that are feeding water to the valley for agricultural use, industrial use, and drinking water. This is the metropolitan area in green. So, and this is the agriculture area. So we have a huge, considerable agriculture in this area. We have an aquifer, which is fed by these catchments. So, but we have this context of scarcity. What we found is two paradigms in managing water. One that is the well-known integrated water resources management that look at the different components, like nature, like a complex system where we can interlink things, and one that is more based in customary law, power rights, water rights. That is a traditional way in how people they have been managing water. So we have socio-hydrological versus hydrosocial paradigms that are conflicting. That is what we found there. And that creates that these two, so government was promoting an integrated water resource management approach, but still people are managing by customary law, by customary rights. What we suggested from the water board, the departmental or the regional water board, is to make a paradigm shift. So why we don't look at water not as a resource anymore, but as a common. So why we don't start, or why we don't engage in a consultation dialogue with citizens, with users, to see the ways to develop a new institutionality that allow us to see water not as a resource that I may use. So let's say a utilitarian value approach or views, but more water as a common, intrinsic, the water by itself, what value it has. And we're not going here to do any kind of crematistic analysis, or I'm not going for that, you'll see. So what does it mean? Is we can create in this dialogue through different platforms, so a kind of polycentric governance, having nodes, platforms at different parts of the territory, with user associations, farmers. We can engage in a kind of citizens initiatives and public-private projects. So investment and initiatives from the citizens. We can create a kind of institutional agreements that somehow are, and these institutional agreements that have a kind of legitimacy are institutionalized or have a legal approach through river basin management plans. So the plan is somehow the legal tool that can enforce these agreements. So that is a quite already interesting approach when I'm looking at my country in Spain, where we have the big, huge water management boards, and we have always this technocratic approach on management, on river basin management plans. So here we are coming from a different angle. What we went is through a consultation engineering process. So water as a common, so we live with the water, not in between brackets against water, but we embrace water as a common, as an element that creates community. And we drive on three principles. One is that of equity. So as a, let's say, fairness, to say it like that, responsibility, like careness, and autonomy. It means that it's people who decide how they want to live together with the water. And this consultation engineering was somehow based on 4 pillars or 4 points. Watershed approach, so catchment approach, management. So we are not looking at either multi-sectorial, but what is the service of nature. Okay, culture, a new culture and how to approach water issues, access to water, economic, the economy of water, but also authority. So at the end it was a very, we had always this discussion in the regional water board, who is the water authority? Where lies the authority in management, in the management of water? And at the end, in the farmers, in the users, because they decide how they want to manage the water at one level. But of course, we have these multidimensional scales and levels. So authority is nothing that you can say, okay, maybe there's a regional authority, but at different levels, there are different authorities in how you manage water. What all these ideas, how they land, how they unfold in a practical way? Well, to discuss about the values of water, how we want to deal with water, on this values approach, on this water ethics approach, means to have a geoprospective ideas, not water in a territory. The territory is a social construct. And here, water is one part of it, is the roads that they cross this territory. And they interlink with the people and they create this sense of community, something that is at the basics of the Andean culture and communities. So what we did is a strategic agenda, Agenda del Agua de Cochabamba, where we, let's say, we put the principles in how we want to deal with water. And then we want to river basin management plans, which is what we have here. So how we transform, how we translate these principles in what does it mean from a sectorial approach? What does it mean in what kind of solutions? What kind of solutions? It means more epuration stations. That means, so usually we go to the why of the things, why we want to do something, and then to how and to what. I will talk about this later, but more was this flow. Then, of course, at the end of the project was a kind of thinking about what we did. We did a nice publication in that you can see here, but going back, this is going through the reflection of what we did. We realized we did a small here trying to say, well, what is what were the institutional rules, where the actors, and where the power interests. So if you see more institutional approach, more political ecology approach, powers and resistance, and what are the actors? And we saw that actually people are pretty much on defending their frameworks, their paradigms, their thinking frames, their world views, but also was emerging key actors. For example, the DGA here is the regional water board that appears from the institution. This is an initiative or a change that comes not from the people, but from the institutions themselves, and saying, we need to rethink how we deal with water. And that it was a kind of, we realized that the change, like a lesson learned, the change always comes from inside. The external factors are important, but change mainly comes from inside, because it was a willingness to change, but only because this was needed. So that was a bit where 3 years project and a kind of documenting evidence. So those are the facts. And that is the first part of my presentation. So the second presentation, because it's getting more dense, the second presentation is, okay, what I'm gonna share now is a study that was recently presented in another international conference. It is a paper, as always. All what I will present, we have peer-reviewed papers in international publications. So it's something that you can find easily on the website. Now we're gonna understand from a governance point of view, what are the values behind in how humans and nature, they relate each other. So let's take social ecological systems, and let's look at a values approach. to understand the tool that I'm using for that, the values that underpin our way in how we relate with nature, with the geosphere. I will talk about geosphere because nature, okay, it's, I will talk about the geosphere. I will explain you later why. Geosphere, because somehow it's the raw materials that they allow our current development model. Okay, and that has ecological justice and special justice implications. So what we develop a kind of analytical tool to see what are the values that underpin our relations. We relate our relations with nature. It's very important. We relate with nature in the way how we relate to other humans. So how we relate to other humans. I'm making here a very interesting link because the actual crisis that we are facing, environmental crisis, is a social crisis that we have from the Pope Francis to Nash, Iranian American philosophers saying what we have is a crisis of values in how we deal with our developing model right now. So we assume that we take this point of view, and then let's see what values, how we relate with other people, and how we relate with nature. Here, I'm going to take the same approach. I don't know why this is not running. Okay, so we are in Catalonia. We are in a delta, 80 kilometers north of Barcelona. Is a delta that is not, it's okay, in a catchment that is not regulated. There are no dams there, but we have in this delta a problem of, let's say, a quick, strong, is a quite anthropized by tourists, by urbanization of the coastal areas, and we have a water board or a participatory water board that is blocking somehow all possible technocratic solutions. Again, technocratic solutions, the way in how we relate with nature, the way we relate with the geosphere, okay? So that is the situation. We have regression, okay? You see here from the last storm in March, we have a almost 2 meters per year of erosion. And the main erosion factors are, we have sediment, that is because we have a flow, is a main river, is 80 kilometers, river, maybe less, sorry, 40, yeah. So it's very, with a lot of man-made infrastructure, we have a proliferation of ports and harbors, and we have extreme weather events as a result of climate change. So what happened when the beaches disappear? It's just they're fill up again with sand. So that is the situation. Again, what is the real problem? Is the model in how we see this territory. This is as you see by the picture, is a quite touristic area. So, and it supposes, of course, a lot of income. It supposes is a mass tourism, southern beach, what we call in Spain. And well, of course, that brings a lot of money, but it's also destroying the coastline, huh? The dunes, the system itself. So it's a social ecological system, huh? But has been already modified. So we will not call, and the other thing interesting is a socio-ecological cum technical system. It's a socio-biotechnical system where the artifacts in how we relate with nature modify the system itself. So it's a bit, yes, not anymore a socio-ecological system as we understand, okay? Ostrom and all this theory of socio-ecological systems, so on and so forth. What we do is a geotechnical, a geoethical dilemma. So to understand the values. So what basically is a matrix where the main actors, okay, they position themselves on the values, on what values what is the attitude that reflect their values. And we try to, that makes different alternatives, 2 alternatives for the main 2 actors in the territory. And for each alternative crossing with other actors, alternative from the other actor, we create a scenario. So a scenario is nothing else that in the way and how we relate to the other actor, which impact I produce on nature, on the territory, and what is the risk. So it's a kind of feedback relation. And we will see now in this example. And for each scenario, we assign a credibility, because credibility is key in producing cultural change. What we want to move is from scenarios that are more or less catastrophic, because the values that underpin our way in how we relate to other humans or to other agents, human agents, and means that the scenario that we create for nature, and we want to create we want to move to the more catastrophic to the more sustainable, if you want to say it like that. So for each scenario, we had a credibility that allows us to understand what is the game, what are this values game, and to start a dialogue. This is the matrix that I was talking about. So we have the public administration that can follow a vision where economic benefit provides. So more tourists, we don't change anything. More public administration that goes for a prospective approach. We want to change things, how they are working, you know? The conflict or the dilemma is the disruption of the coastal system, because mass tourism, okay? And we have a tourist, let's say, we have people, locals, that they go for a new model, the growing proximity, local tourists, or they keep us going in the same model. Of course, what does it mean? That doesn't mean that we take into consideration the system, the coastal system, for example, on the intrinsic values here, and that means that we have a more utilitarian approach to our coastal system. Okay, here the same. So we see different scenarios with an impact and a vulnerability associated, and we are and for each one also we have a credibility. Okay, up to here all fine. This is the current scenario, a scenario that has credibility 0. Here previously I didn't mention attitude 1, when this attitude reflect our values. Okay, those are the attitude that we are, and so we have as an associated cost, social cost again. I mean, how people they evaluate our attitude. Meaning there is always a third actor that observes, that evaluate our interaction by public administration and local inhabitants of the region. So we have a scenario which is credibility, with the lowest credibility, and we have a scenario that will be well, that's where we would like to go, no? Recovery of the socio-environmental model, a political low cost, economic growth, some ideal situation, a credibility, you know, it's a scenario that has a credibility. The interesting thing, as I will expose in my next presentation, is that we stand here. Somehow, when we know that these scenarios with the one with the lowest credibility, we stick here. We are stuck here. And we don't move to this scenario that has the highest credibility. So how, at least if we cannot move to this one, we could shift from the first to the third, or the first to the second. What we do is engage in a dialogue of values. How we can, let's say, to increase the credibility of a scenario 3 and a scenario 2. And basically, this engagement on a values dialogue, what it means is that we put in place a solidarity principle. So the dialogue is per se a solidarity. How we can remove social cost, how we can together, not to share benefits, but to share burdens. So it's a quite of shifting around. It's not the sharing benefit approach that maybe you are familiar with, but now how we share burdens in my attitudes in front of different values. So in here, in a scenario 3, that means to pose questions. How, for example, the investors, the tourist sector could share, for example, benefits by improving living conditions of the locals. That means, for example, well, a number of technocratic solutions, more green areas. How this tourist becomes more friendly. And here we have basically removing social costs from this tourist sector and increasing the credibility. I hope that you see my arrow. Also, we can improve the credibility of a scenario 2, and means how we can commit proposals of the population, of the environmental groups, not only in, let's say, we don't like this development plan here, this tourism development plan, but how we rethink the tourist itself. It means here also we are increasing the credibility of the scenario 2, that it was 1, 2, a credibility 2. Okay, we are using these values, could be another values, by removing the social gain. The idea is what the geoethical dilemma is to put me crystal clear on, let's say, on a matrix, to expose myself, my values, and my attitude in front of my values. So I uncover myself and I can start to have a dialogue that goes beyond, okay, we want this, this model. So we are not discussing the what or the how, but we are discussing the why of the solutions. These solutions are always understood as a technocratical artifacts. Can be laws, can be depuration stations, can be desalinization stations, can be different, enacting different groups. That is an array of things that I call technocratic solutions that, that are the main point in how I relate to nature. At the end is very easy. What kind of values, what future I want? We could have something like that. We can have something like that. We are moving now to Russia, and what we are going to try is to see the why of things. I'm going to jump some slides. I'm going here to a very well-known slide of Simon Sinek. This guy is very well known because he used this for the corporative approach. We know what we usually we discuss about the what's, what we want this, and we're going to put this, and that is the solutions. We talk about solutions. What solution? People ask me, okay, this is very nice, but what solutions? People say want solutions, but how? This is a bit more complicated. You know, how we reach there. But the fundamental question is to understand the why, the ultimate why we want to do something about that. Why? And this brings me to the case study, the situation. What we are facing in a general terms, but I will explain now in Russia, is that, well, the real problem is this Anthropocene era that we are living. So again, is the values. Social, we cannot say, okay, we're committed to environmental values when we have in our backyard situations of poverty. Social and environmental issues are closely related. We cannot recycle, batteries here in the cell phones when we know that the canyon and the nickel is coming from the exploitation of mines in Congo by children. So both issues are related. Social and environmental justice make one ecological justice. And to talk about justice means to talk about values. It means to talk about ethics. So we have a very interesting, there are very few words that they tackle this issue. And one is this scholar from Glenna, in 2010 says the conflicts are resolved not because governance, we are discussing participatory issues, because the justice is addressed, because values are addressed. And this is a fundamental thing. What is the problem of this? This is a situation. We have environmental, social issues. The problem is that the development model that we have a very well-known pedagogue, Postman, 93, that starts to talk about this technopoly, this model of growing, this model of consumism, this utilitarian approach to things. Let's call it, if you want to link it to the growing theories. But they make us to believe, whoever is this day, I put it in your words, that the solution to all is technology, is science, is a fallacy. Because, and we know, we had Daly, Mr. Daly saying already in the 80s, saying, even if we change systems of production, we will not change, that will not change our path, our paradigm, our worldview in how we want to develop. So, but this development model is pretty much in how we educate, this is not a pedagogic, we can link it with Paulo Freire, a great pedagogue, in how we, again, this fallacy of science and technology will be the solution for everything. We need to change something because this is not the solution. And it is obvious, I think. I will not go through a number of data. The dilemma The dilemma is, again, is a dilemma of values. The most well-known dilemma is Romeo and Juliet. You know, Juliet and Romeo, they could fall different values and take different attitudes. And then we have a different ending of the tragedy. This is remarkable. Of course, Shakespeare used a very dramatic end, but the real tragedy is two families that they don't talk to each other, that they are odds, that they fight. Is by both of the protagonists dying that the tragedy comes to an end. We need to go through this. We need to really to reach catastrophic situations that we change our values. Let's see. Case of Southern Urals, Lake Tuigayak, a beautiful lake, which has pretty much of pressure by tourists. A completely, you know, this what we saw in Catalonia. The dilemma we have locals that they want to keep on going with the recreational practice. Authorities, we accept an observer, you know, the tourists that say, let's carry on. This is fabulous place to spend our holidays. We are talking a quite small lake, okay? 30 kilometers, 8 kilometers from side to side, okay? So it's a relatively small lake, but one of the best lakes in Russia, compare in waters like the Baikal, the quality of the water. So it will be quite easy to move from a scenario 1 to a scenario 4 by enhancing credibility. You know, this is a more credibility, no doubt about that. So, and this is the current scenario, but it happened something. And I'm going here, you know, it's a contradiction where people, the local, the inhabitants of the region, they say, this is my attitude. But in fact, when you start to dig more into interviews and you start to engage them in more deep discussions, the values, the attitudes, they do not reflect the deeper values of these people. So they will really like to, yes, to protect the lake, but in fact, what the attitude is to say, okay, let's go on in our current model. And this is very interesting because in what I saw is not a dichotomy between intrinsic and instrumental values. There are something more deep in people that makes, let's say, that there is an embedding identity values with the land, with the territory. So let's say, and here's where I say, I make a break. I mean, this was a quite shocking finding. And let's say, okay, let's not theorize. Let's try to find a theory that can explain why people's attitudes is one, but their values are kept inside, very deep. So I use a kind of abduction reasoning. I try to make sense of my observations or experience to interpret the reality. The question then is, what is real? The real is what I see here, what we found in the people saying, okay, let's carry on, or there is something deeper. What is real? Is something that the philosophy tried to explaining, something that the science tried to explaining, or is something more, let's say, in the way how I relate to the reality, what I call a radical alterity, what is as a philosophical concept. What is the human alterity? What is really the real values? And those pretty much relate with my identity to a place. Is the capacity to share my acts in how I the alterity emerge and how I act with this reality. It's quite very difficult to explain in such a short time. What is the concept that can allow me to explain this, say, these new values that are neither intrinsic or neither, let's say, utilitarian? Well, here, there is an interesting concept, the concept of noosphere. The concept of noosphere is a very challenging concept. Some people, they say, like the evolution of the human mind. That was how Bernansky coined it in the 40s. Teilhard de Chardin, that is very well known, was a very influenced a lot of thinking in the United Nations, was like a kind of evolution of the human thought, the evolution of a collective human consciousness. Some people, they understood that, some scholars, like the Gaia theory, is a self-organized, self-regulating system at planetary scale. And some people, some scholars, like Mosef, who was one of the most prominent researchers at the IASA in Vienna, and who was following the Bernansky, let's say, theories, saw it like the geosphere governability. I would say that it's not neither one or another, but is let's say, is the overall of this concept. Different interpretations of this concept has been probably is interesting under this geological erosion approach, how, well, or the Gaia theory, the Earth as like a biosphere, like a thermodynamic ideas, how this noosphere can be interpreted, how also many others, they see it as a interrelation between human activity, climate, atmosphere, biosphere, or more a cybernetic approach, different stage in human development, and how this human development means from, development in knowledge. What I used to understand this noosphere approach is that it's more like our intimate relation with the land. I'm not using here anymore the concept of territory, but to say my relation, the land holds the values of my identity, the values on how my grandparents and the parents of my grandparents, they were related to this land. And that modifies biochemical cycles through time. So finally, the land is the memory who holds these identity values. I'm the land. The land holds my identity. Is this implication? And that has a very deep, let's say, it frames ideologies in terms of ecological point of views. So it frames eco-ideologies and how we relate with the land. So it's taking a more human ecology approach in this understanding at how we relate to the land and how this soul to soul is more agnostic knowledge. So it's an unconscious collective, of all human beings, together relating to a specific place. Is, as Bernansky would say, the energy or field of human energy as a collective unconscious, affecting the memory of the cycles of the biochemical cycles. That sounds very conceptual, but it's a concept that makes me to explain how these identity values, this position of these locals in this Lake Turgayak, they hold in their values even when their attitudes is completely different. So they will take an attitude of resistance, a resistance in hope, in saying, this is our values, but unfortunately, we cannot, our attitude, we need to carry on. So we need to find a compromise in between intrinsic values and utilitarian values in how we relate with nature, with the geosphere. I will jump this because, so in that way, the noosphere is not only an Earth system concept, but it's more a geoetic concept. So we look to change the human morality. So the morality of the man as the largest geological force. Bernansky would say the human is the large geological force. And we say here, these values, the morality of the man is the largest geological force. So we look for a new man, we look for a noospheric human, to say it like that. So it's pretty much in this idea of values. Just to finish here, I jump a couple of slides, is okay, at the end is, well, taking this acknowledging this attitude as an attitude in front others, in front the nature. What I can do? Well, what I can do is to take, well, this is more like a suggestion, is something that we are experimenting now, is to taking the long march with the institutions. This is a phrase coined by Marcuse in the 70s with the student movement in Germany. So how I can change things? What is my ethical position? I can take, again, and I'm answering now the question of participation and power. I'm not going to change things from power by having power, or let's say the ethics of the non-power. What I'm going to try is to transform reality in how we relate with nature from inside. I'm gonna resist in my values, even if my attitude needs to be another one because I cannot do anything. I'm gonna change on the values, and from inside, from within the institutions, I'm gonna try to shift things. Is how I'm producing this paradigm shift. I will keep it here because that's a bit dense, and I would like to listen some of you having opinions about that.
So thank you, Francis. So once again, please use raise your hand function in the chat, and I will go with the first question, maybe not directly towards the last presentation, but you mentioned at the beginning that you work as a consultant and produce some documents for stakeholder or decision maker. So can you please maybe explain a bit how those decision makers that you work with or contact take up the concepts that you presented or that you elaborate usually?
Well, that will go, unfortunately, to a presentation that I cannot. I mean, because the answer's there, but maybe just quickly. Look, this is a project that we are involved now. Okay, is how we unfold this geoethical concept in a kind of, let's see if I can quickly, yeah. What we are trying in the Ebro Delta in Catalonia, which is a delta which is suffering subsidence and rising of sea level because climate change, is to look at the, let's put it here, okay? To develop a territorial model which creates resilient communities and territorial innovation by identifying what are the challenges, identifying what are the actors and where the potential leadership is, and to open a value-based shared vision. So going to this strategy that I present in Cochabamba, to engage everybody, not only engage, but to commit everybody, and let's talk not about principles, let's talk not about solutions, let's not talk about how we can reach the solutions before our values-based dialogue is open. It's not trying to be a consensus, it's not trying to have consent, it's trying to have all parties in a territory, in a relatively small territory, coming and talk, coming and dialogue. But it's a dialogue that is not, let's say, dialectic. It's a dialogue that is dialogic. It's accepting that you don't hold the truth, but the truth also, the truth on your values also relies in the other people truths. So you can build a perspective, or you can create a vision of how you visualize this territory for the future. And then we will talk about how we can reach there, which is this unfolding, so by partnership analysis, and you can create about solutions, which basically means to develop an authenticity distinction for nature-based solutions. So what leaders, what companies, what startups want to take this approach and to go beyond governance to implement these pretty much values as understood as an identity with a territory. That's how we are trying to move forward.
Okay, thank you very much for this explanation.
It was a bit too quick, but well,
yeah,
you pushed me for it.
Yeah, no, it was good. I don't see any question in the chat. Yeah, so if you want to have a 1 minute closing sentence, it's the moment.
Yes, because we are almost at the end. It took more than expected. And the theoretical development about that is a publication coming soon about that. Is not so easy to explain the concept of noosphere. I mean, maybe a couple of things that I always remark, because pretty much what we are talking here is not about, we're going beyond governance and management approaches. We're talking about more ecological justice and spatial justice approaches. So we are discussing about values. And to overcome this, let's say, what values, this dichotomy that exists, and already Rolston in the 80s was discussing, I go for utilitarian values or for intrinsic values. It's not about that. Let me put it very simple, just 30 seconds. You know, in the way, in how we relate with others and we relate to nature. So the miner, for example, that takes a mineral from the bottom of the earth, you know, that will be used to do, I don't know, a scan in a hospital because it has a rare material. You know, this guy holds in his work with in his relation with the land an identity. What we need just to do is to express a gratitude. It's not that mining, or it's not that tourism is not should be forbidden, or we should protect, we should go. I'm trying to avoid these anthropocentric, ecocentric wars, and to find something, these values of identity that are related to the land, you know, in a way that we belong to it, like the miner belongs to the land, and with his efforts takes a mineral that is converting in something useful for society. And we express gratitude for this process, for this manufacturation process. So these identity values allow us a bit to think out of the box in how to overcome these ecocentric, anthropocentric approaches, which are, in my opinion, yes, not bring us too further into solve or to discuss about these issues.